This is the part 10 video. That means there's at least 30 of these after midnight horror stories. Goddamn, midnight is dangerous. Anyways, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true scary after midnight horror stories. Hopefully, this is the last one.
The Whistle. Growing up, I lived in a house right smack in the middle of my local cemetery. I didn't like it much when I was a kid, being easily spooked by it and all that, but I grew to appreciate it a lot more as I got older, as I always had a place to go running without a lot of other people around, and it was a nice, quiet place. Keep in mind, the cemetery is huge, like at the very least 2,000 graves. When I was growing up, around age 13 or so, I would venture out late with the neighborhood kids who had lived around me, so the cemetery never really scared me much when I was older, despite the fact that there were absolutely no lights, not even something reminiscent of a streetlight to be found in the cemetery. I was about 16 years old when one of my friends from school was staying the night at my house over the summer, and it was shortly after midnight. We had been at a loss as to what to do all night, and us two being bored teenage girls, I brought up a mildly unsafe idea. Want to go for a walk in the cemetery? At first, my friend was pretty reluctant, but with a couple minutes of persuasion, she eventually warmed up to do it. I told her, I lived here my whole life and done this dozens of times, and I've yet to encounter anything or anyone creepy, I promise. Which was, for the most part, true. So we snuck out of my side window, being careful not to wake my parents, and we trekked up the steep path that leads from the street in front of my house to the cemetery. The cemetery is the basic shape of a circle, with another path connecting through it long ways, and another path that cuts halfway through perpendicular to the other path, and eventually has an exit that leads out to a main road. My friend and I walked for about a couple minutes till we made it down the path that cuts directly through the cemetery, which gives you a view to the main road on which you can enter the cemetery, and the entrance was about 7 yards away. Our conversation was cut short by a suspicious car that slowed around the cemetery entrance, eventually coming to a stop in the direct middle of the road. Silent. We didn't even need to communicate to each other just how strange this was. People tend to fly down this road, and if you stop dead in the middle, you're bound to get hit, jam up traffic, or at least raise a couple eyebrows. Eventually, we saw the dark window of the passenger side roll down slightly, and out of all the things that could have happened, what we heard probably was not the worst, but to this day, it still remains as one of the most haunting, bone-chilling sounds I've ever heard. Instead of catcalling or even trying to get our attention, whoever was in the car just whistled. Not a wolf whistle or anything, just a strange, drawn-out tone that cut sharply upward at the end that seemed to echo off every stone and grass-covered hill around us. Think kinda like the whistle at the beginning of West Side Story? This sound occurred about 3 times before I finally let out, "What the fuck?" Suddenly the car reversed, and I realized with horror what it was doing. It was trying to back up towards the cemetery entrance right where we were. The minute we saw it move, I started noping backwards up the path until I just whispered, "Run!" We broke into a sprint the entire way back to my house, all the while that whistle echoed. Even when the car was pretty much out of sight, I didn't have my glasses on, and the cemetery was lit by nothing but the moon, so I had a difficult time locating the path back to my house, stumbling past gravestones and through the grass. We made it onto my street, and we bolted towards my house when we heard the whistle one last time. I locked the doors and we sat catching our breath for a good 5 minutes before we even talked about what had just happened. To this day, my parents still don't know that we snuck out or any of this happened. In retrospect, it was probably just someone calling out for a lost pet, but the circumstances and my friend's initial reluctance probably blew it out of proportion. But then again, who goes looking for a lost pet at 11:30 at night? But creepy guy whistling in the cemetery at night, let's let's not meet again. Singing at midnight. Sometimes I have trouble sleeping, so I go out to the balcony on my third-floor condo and smoke a cigarette and look out at the pond behind my building. The night that this encounter happened, I was sitting on my balcony at about midnight when I heard a deep male voice singing. I couldn't make out the words, but I think he was singing a minor key of Swing Low Sweet Chariot. I looked down to the ground and saw a silhouetted figure coming around the corner of the building from the parking lot. I couldn't make out any facial features, but the man was kind of stumbling towards the stairs of my building. I assumed he was drunk by the way he was walking. I began to laugh a little. I think I laughed too loud though, because he stopped walking and singing and looked up at me. Luckily, my balcony was dark, so I don't think he could see me. After what seemed like an hour, he changed his focus and looked up at the sky and started letting out horrible coughs, like 10 times worse than a smoker's cough. He then fell to the ground and started wheezing and coughing uncontrollably. At this, I started to panic for his safety, and I put my pants on and ran downstairs to make sure he was okay. When I got to the first floor, he was standing up again, facing the pond, and looking up at the stairs. I said, "Excuse me, are you okay, sir?" He didn't say anything. He was about 5 inches taller than me, and somewhat built, so I stayed a good distance away from him in case he was on drugs or having a bad trip or something. The black man, still looking up at the sky, tilted his head and started to hum a soft tune and swing back and forth. I didn't recognize it at first, but then I realized it was Lullaby and Good Night. I started to freak out a bit because I still hadn't seen his face, and I had no idea what was wrong with this guy. I decided I should go upstairs to my place and watch from a distance and decide whether or not to call the cops. When I turned around, there was a lady standing behind me. She was so close, I don't know how I didn't hear her come up. She was African American, had long black hair that came down to her hips. Her eyes were very dark and glazed over, and she had her pointer finger pressed to her lips. This is when I thought, yep, that's it, I'm dead, they got me. Somehow I croaked out, "Do you know this guy?" She didn't answer. I started moving towards the stairs, keeping my eye on both of them. When I reached the stairs, I said, Do you need me to call for help?" Again, no answer. When the man turned around and gave me the blankest, most awful stare I'd ever seen, I ran up to my house and shut the door and went to bed, not even looking out my balcony to see what happened. Don't judge me. I'm only 20 years old and I was freaked out. The creepiest part, though, is that after that night, I never saw them around the complex again. I don't know if they just didn't live here or they moved or got kicked out, but I am glad to never see them again. And this encounter is why I don't do drugs. A chase never truly begins until you start running. I had mostly forgotten about this story until someone linked me to the subreddit. After thoroughly creeping myself out for a few days, I decided to contribute as well. For many years, I spent my summers working in a major southern US city with a moderately high crime rate and some serious racial conflict. Now, I grew up in New York City and live there to this day, and I'm not overly afraid of walking around in some of my city's more infamous areas at night, but I think it's important to respect the city you're in, and I knew that the southern city was quite a bit more dangerous for me to walk around alone in, especially as a young petite woman, 5'0", 105 pounds. I'm pretty strong, a lot stronger than people think by looking at me, but I know better than to think I would do well in a one-on-one fight. To be honest, in my summer city, I wouldn't usually even walk home alone after work, since I worked until 10 p.m. or later. Even though it was only a 10-minute walk, it seemed silly to ask someone for a ride when it was a lovely and short walk through a gorgeous city, but I also just knew that I didn't feel safe. It wasn't even the caution I have sometimes felt in a crummy neighborhood back home, but just a totally different feeling. A complete inability to be confidently safe. I loved my summers here, but I avoided being alone after dark at all costs. But as often happens, we make little compromises. It was midnight, and the only other person in the office was staying for another couple hours. While one of the events we were managing wound up, he asked if I wanted him to drive me home, but I knew that this would mean locking the entire building up, driving like 2 minutes, then 2 minutes back, and then disarming the security system again, etc. And I just felt silly, like a scared little girl. I said, "Nah, I'll be okay. I only live a few blocks away," and I went on my merry way. I walked with my head up, my strides sure, my ears open, like I do back home. I got 1 block, and then another block. It was a gorgeous night, and I let myself enjoy it and relax a little bit, as I hoped in vain for a gentle breeze to cool me off a little, and enjoy the symphony of the various insects that came out at night. It was ungodly humid, and I didn't see a single other person. Definitely a different type of city than New York City. But I could hear the gentle hum of nightlife from the main drag 1 avenue over. I got a 3rd block, and then I saw another person. A man. Of course, I thought to myself, as my anxiety ratcheted up, and I instantly admonished myself for this bias. I was out walking alone at night after all. Why didn't a man have the same right? But, and this has never happened to me before or since, something about the sight of that man, that specific man, terrified me. I couldn't tell you why. He was in his mid-20s, had long shaggy hair. As the moonlight reflected off of him, I could see it was blonde. Everything about him struck me as sort of an anomaly. I don't mean to make such judgments, but at that time of night, most of the white people are in bed, or in groups heading out to bars or something. Of course, then again, I'm white too, so he looked like a surfer, not a stalker. He was actually pretty cute, and yet I could hardly bear to look at him, because looking at him filled me with such fear and apprehension. I know that you can never tell, but it really struck me how much this guy did not look like the sort of guy who would terrify me, and yet how absolutely terrified he made me feel for reasons I could not articulate. There was nothing objectively scary about him, and yet I just felt a sickening dread as we slowly approached each other. It wasn't just that I was alone at night. I didn't know what it was, but I knew he scared me. He was walking towards me, and I had to walk towards him to get home. We got closer. He got bigger and bigger as he approached, and I felt smaller and smaller as I approached him. Maybe a minute passed. Soon we were on the same block. I willed myself to just get past him and get over with it, and yet when I was about 20 feet away from him, I stopped. I don't know why. I just really didn't want to walk past him. It almost felt like I couldn't make myself go any closer. This is ridiculous, I told myself. I even began to blush in the dark summer night, embarrassed by my behavior. But, just to ease my mind, I crossed the street, feeling foolish. And then, he crossed the street. "Don't come any closer to me," I said loudly, without even meaning to. It just came out of me. It surprised me how complete it was, how it was exactly what I felt and exactly what I wanted most in the world at that moment. Translated into words, "Don't come any closer to me." How it was a command, not a request. Don't. I never heard myself sound so sure of anything before in my life, honestly. My voice was the first real sound I'd heard in several minutes, and I was surprised at how cold it felt, breaking the tension, and finally starting this, whatever this was. He looked like it startled him too. "Don't be scared," he said after a moment, though he did not stop walking towards me. "I'm not scared," I said. "I just don't want you near me." We stood there for a moment at an impasse, looking at each other. "Please," he said. "I got mugged. Someone stole my wallet and my phone. I don't have any money, and I need to call someone to come get me." "There's a gas station 1 block over. On that avenue right there," I pointed to the right of us. "They have a phone." "I'm not from here, and I had too much to drink, and I don't want to get lost," he said. I surprised myself with all the red flags I noticed as soon as they went up. His clear and sober-sounding speech, his local-sounding accent, the fact that I was the first to speak, the one to initiate the dialogue, when, if he was the one who needed help, you'd think he would have said something first. The weirdness of someone going out alone and getting drunk on their own in a strange city, instead of hanging out with friends or drinking moderately or anything like that. I know it's not impossible. I've traveled alone myself and enjoyed my own company in plenty of bars, but it all just seemed like a bunch of relatively less than common stuff, and all taken together, it made me wary. He continued, "Will you walk me to the gas station? Or can I borrow your phone?" "No," I said. "You should turn right and walk until you come to the next intersection, and you'll be at the very busy road with a gas station on your left side." "Please help me," he said. "I'm not gonna hurt you, I just need help." He started walking again, towards me, slow, like how you approach a cat. "Seriously, what's wrong with you? I just need help." I thought of my Leatherman and flick knife, both of which I use regularly for work, both of which were buried somewhere in the bottom of my messy, messy purse. My fingers twitched with longing, but I didn't want to be distracted, so I didn't start fumbling around for them. "I told you," I said, raising my voice. "Don't come closer to me." I stepped backwards and hated myself for doing it. It felt like a sort of mini surrender. He took another step forwards. "I won't hurt you," he said. I began crossing the empty street again, walking backwards at first, just to keep my eyes on him, and I said, "I'll scream. There's a cop who's stationed on a bike 4 blocks away. He's there every night, and he'll hear me scream. He'll be here in seconds. You should really turn right at this corner. It'll take you directly to the gas station." "If you say so," he said, and I felt a distinct and chilling question within myself of whether, in his ambiguity, was he referring to the location of the gas station or location of the police officer. He didn't start walking. I stood there on the other side of the street, wary of taking my eyes off of him, but he didn't start walking, so I did. I walked until we were directly across the street from each other, and then I walked farther. I glanced at him over my shoulder after a few steps, and he was still there, watching me, going nowhere, just watching me. I walked a few more steps and glanced over my shoulder at him again. He was still standing there. I picked up the pace and went a ways farther, looked back. He was gone. Completely gone. He had to have moved quickly. A lot quicker than he was moving before, when he was walking towards me to reach that intersection and turn right towards the gas station in just those few steps. I couldn't stop wondering, where else could he have gone, moving that quickly without me watching? I didn't think he could have crossed the whole street and managed to hide somewhere, at least not without me hearing. I glanced at the sidewalk across from me. It was lined with trees and bushes. There were massive gardens all along it, all kinds of yards and stuff like that. There were almost no streetlights, and so many shadows. He could be anywhere. I thought about turning down a side street and heading towards the main drag, where all the bars and restaurants were. I glanced down one as I passed. No streetlights at all, just sleepy, silent buildings all empty for the night, and the bright lights of the next avenue seemed impossibly far away. I just kept going straight, and I tried to tell myself to calm the fuck down. He was just someone out walking alone, just like I was, nothing more. I even managed to work up some guilt over not helping him. I like to think of myself as a good person, but it bothered me that I had been so rude to someone who might really have needed help. But at the time, I just couldn't make myself relax about it. I wanted to run, but I desperately didn't want to run. Maybe just a leftover superstition from childhood, but somehow I felt that a chase never truly begins until you start running. So I walked, quickly. I looked back. I saw shadows. So many shadows. I walked quicker. I looked back again. Nothing but shadows. I willed myself to calm down, but I couldn't make it happen. Finally, I approached the block where the cop on the bicycle was always waiting behind a few trees. With that grove in sight, I broke into a run. The chase was finally on, if it ever would be. I sprinted, and then as my panic grew, I pushed even faster down that last block. The cop heard me running his way before he really saw me. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked as I approached him, still largely shrouded by the shadows of the trees around him, straddling his bike, peering out at me. "Yes," I replied, feeling silly immediately. "I'm fine, sorry, I just got scared." I smiled in apology and began to make fun of myself, the way we so often do when we feel stupid. But the cop was already looking behind me over my shoulder. "Sir," he called, loudly, finally coming out of the shadows so he could fully be seen. "Can I help you with anything?" "No, thanks," I heard a voice say. I turned around and there was the man, maybe 30 feet behind me, just staring, looking. I can only think that he followed me after all, slinking along in the shadows, that he walked when I walked, and eventually he ran when I ran, to keep up, even though full-on running meant abandoning his cover. "Do you know him?" the cop asked. "No," I said quietly. "He told me he got mugged and he wanted me to help him, but I was scared so I didn't help him." Even in that moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. I waited for the man to come closer, to tell the cop that he had been mugged, that he needed a phone, to prove that I was the horrible person in the situation, not him. He said nothing. He waved, then turned around and started walking the other way. He didn't look back. I waited with a police officer, and we watched him walk for several minutes, and then I asked the cop to escort me to my home a block away. When we got to my front door, the cop asked if I was okay, or if I wanted to make a formal statement. I couldn't really think of what I would even say. I was walking out alone and saw another person out walking alone, and I yelled at him when he asked me for help, and then he followed me, and all I really know is that he was blonde, and I was a bit shocked and stunned, so I said no, and thanked him for helping me get home safely. I went inside and used my flashlight to get to bed, too scared to turn on the lights, for fear that they would render me visible from the street. It wasn't until I was already laying down, sweltering in my unair-conditioned bedroom because I couldn't bear to open the windows, that I found myself wondering if I hadn't run, if he hadn't been forced to run, and thus abandoned the silent but uneven cover of the shadows and trees. Would the police officer have seen him at all? Or would he have remained hidden, watching me, following me right up to my very doorstep, lurking in my own bushes as I climbed the stairs to the porch and fought to get my key in the lock? Would I have waved to the cop bravely, speed walking my way home, willing myself not to run, with that man slithering behind me the whole time, unseen by either of us? And if so, what then?